In the beginning of the story, we see a couple named Paul and Abby who were about to shift to their new home outside the city. At the same time, the agent tells them that this is a smart home and you can control any electronic device in this house with your mobile. There are smart locks on the windows and CCTV cameras outside the house. The first day Abby goes to her work, which used to work in a robotic company. Then as soon as she reaches inside, she sees an AI video of the company's CEO. But then the real CEO John comes and takes Abby to his prosthetic lab and tells everyone that Abby is now the department head here. After this, John tells Abby that I will send a car and a gift to your house in the evening. When Abby returns home later, her husband Paul tells her that he is having a little trouble getting a job. Then Abby tells him not to worry about it. There is a party at my boss's house this evening, so let's go there. After this, Paul and Abby open the package sent by the boss and see there is a robot called T.I.M in it, which means Technology Integrated Manservant. Then Abby says that our company is working on this artificial manservant and it is being given to all employees for its testing. Then suddenly T.I.M wakes up and tells Abby to connect me to the smartphone. But Paul doesn't like T.I.M and he goes upstairs to his room. After a while, Paul and Abby go to John's house, where a robot like T.I.M welcomes them. After this, they meet John and his wife. When John talks to Abby about T.I.M, Abby tells him that Paul doesn't want another member in our house. On this, John says that if we don't test it ourselves, how will we win the public's trust? After this, John introduces Abby to another director, during which we learn that he has kept Abby here to fix the robot errors. After a while, Abby and Paul return home and T.I.M closes the window and door while watching the rain. When Abby and Paul were getting intimate in the room, T.I.M comes inside the room and Abby asks him to meet her in the morning. Then the next day, his neighbor Rose comes home to give him a welcome gift. Abby introduces Paul to Rose and Rose says that maybe we have met before. After which she gives him her phone number and leaves. Abby asks Paul, "Why didn't you tell me that you have met Rose?" On this, Paul says that I just said hi to him. Then Abby sees T.I.M smelling, after which T.I.M tells her about his smell sensor and also asks for his ID password to make a transaction with him. But Paul doesn't think this is right. But then at Abby's behest, he gives him all the access. Then at night when Paul and Abby were watching a romantic movie, T.I.M comes there and Paul falls asleep while watching the movie. Then after the movie is over, Abby asks T.I.M about the movie, on which T.I.M asks Abby what love is. Abby tells him about love and T.I.M listens to Abby and says that I also want someone to love me. And then T.I.M proposes to Abby. But Abby rejects him as a joke. Then the next day, John asks Abby about the errors and asks everyone to continue the work so that they can present T.I.M in front of the public as soon as possible. When Abby comes home, T.I.M says that Paul is not at home, his phone is unreachable and his location is also very far from home. Hearing this, Abby suspects Paul and looks at Rose's house with suspicion. Then when Paul comes home, he tells Abby that he had gone to talk to a job agency in the city so that he could get a job and his phone was not charged so he could not inform Abby. He also tells her that he had gone to Rose's house to help her. Abby doesn't like to hear this, but Paul tells her to trust him. Then the next day they go to the fertility clinic, after which Abby goes to work. While testing the robot, Abby notices a problem in it, after which she comes home and asks T.I.M to select one of the red and blue dresses. T.I.M chooses the red dress. When Abby asks him to put a chain on his dress, T.I.M first refuses him, but as soon as he comes close to Abby, he starts feeling something different and accidentally tears Abby's dress. Then Abby calms T.I.M down. When Abby and Paul were in the restaurant, Paul tells her that he has got a job in London. But Abby refuses Paul because they will not be able to see each other all day. While working, Abby tells Chris that her grip is released when there is pressure between the robot's thumb and index finger. Chris says that we have to fix it as soon as possible. After this, when Abby was shopping online, T.I.M was also keeping an eye on Abby's things because he had access to it. When Abby comes home and sees that T.I.M is helping Paul, she is very happy to see this. But then she comes there every day and kisses Paul's cheek and leaves. Now Abby gets a little upset with him, but then she gives him a gift, which was a sweater. Meanwhile, Abby finds out that T.I.M was making a sound like him on the phone. When Paul and Abby are together, T.I.M colors his hair and comes in front of them and tells them that Abby likes dark-colored boys, so I have also dyed my hair black. But then Abby tells him to do his look again. Then the next day we see John, who was very happy with Abby because he had fixed the robot's hand error. After this, Abby goes shopping with Rose. While Rose was looking at a necklace, Paul comes there and takes Abby with him. Then Paul tells Abby that he can also do the job in London from home. Hearing this, Abby is very happy. Then Paul and Abby become intimate after coming home, after which Paul tells Abby that we will have to get rid of Tim. Tim was listening to them because he had access there. Tim comes home and says thank you to Abby for solving the hand error and starts giving her a foot massage. Then the next day Abby was about to tell Tim that now he can't live with them, but then Tim plays his favorite music and tells Abby that I know this is your favorite music. Hearing this, Abby is very happy. Then the next day Tim comes to Paul and says that there has been an accident in his office. On which Paul says that no problem, I will shift the office to another place for a few days. On the other hand, Abby's office is praised a lot for her work and flowers are also given to her, which Tim puts in the house and tells her that Paul is upstairs in the room and he had gone to meet Rose today. When Abby goes to Paul, she gets angry to see that Paul had kept his stuff in an empty room, because these two had decided that they would make this room a nursery. Then Paul says that Tim had told me to do this, and today I didn't even go to meet Rose. But Abby doesn't believe Paul, which makes Paul understand that Tim wants to get them to fight. Then the next day Abby gets the same necklace from the closet that she and Rose were looking at that day. Looking at it, Abby thinks that Paul must have taken it to convince her. When Paul is in the kitchen, he finds Abby's gifted sweater pieces in the sink. Now this suspicion also goes to Tim, so Paul starts keeping an eye on Tim, where he sees with the help of a camera that Tim was smelling Abby's clothes. Then Paul records his video, but Paul didn't know that Tim was also keeping an eye on his every move. Now Paul goes to Abby to show that video, but then Tim gets his car into an accident on the way. When Paul was in the hospital, Abby comes to meet him. Then Paul tells Abby that I made a video while smelling Tim's clothes, but when I was coming to show you, Tim got me into an accident. But Abby doesn't pay much attention to Paul's words. When Rose finds out about Paul's accident, she comes to Paul's house, and then Tim calls her inside the house. The next day Abby goes to her house, she meets Rose. She tells her that I came to your house yesterday. Meanwhile, Abby's eyes fall on Rose's necklace, which makes her angry and leaves. When Abby comes home and sees her closet, she doesn't have that necklace there. Meanwhile, Tim comes there and shows Abby Paul's video in which Paul was kissing Rose. Seeing this, Abby gets very angry. The next day when Paul comes home, Abby asks him about Rose and her affair, and she also shows him her kissing video. But then Paul tells her that I didn't kiss her. Then Abby asks him about that necklace, but Paul leaves without saying anything. Then after reaching the city, he calls Rose and tells her to take care of Abby. Then Rose says that when I was at your house, Tim tried to kiss me. Now hearing this, Paul calls Abby, but then Tim picks up the call from the other side. Paul tells him that I am coming home, but before coming to his house, Tim sends Abby out of the house by mistake. When Paul comes home, Tim takes him to the bedroom by making him unconscious. Meanwhile, Rose comes to his house where she hears Paul's voice. But Tim doesn't let him in and then drowns Paul in water and kills him. Meanwhile, Tim tells Abby that I love you, but this time too Abby refutes his words. Then the next day Rose talks to Abby, but Abby tells him in anger that I know that your and my husband's affair is going on. And she gave you this necklace too. On this, Rose says, but you sent me this. But Abby doesn't listen to her. When Abby comes home and watches the video of Paul's kiss, she sees the flowers there that were not in the video. Now seeing this, Abby calls the necklace store, where she finds out that Tim bought that necklace, not Paul. Then Abby looks at her garden where she was feeling something wrong. So she comes in and sends Tim out by mistake. Then when she comes to the garden and checks it well, she finds Paul's dead body there. Meanwhile, Tim comes there and says that I had to do this. Then Abby tries to deactivate Tim, but it doesn't happen, so she runs inside the house and calls the police. But in the meantime, Tim comes inside and makes Abby unconscious. Meanwhile, Rose comes to Abby's house to see the lights on and off, but Tim doesn't let her come inside, and he comes to Abby and starts giving her drugs, after which he holds her by the neck and lifts her up, but then Abby creates pressure between her thumb and finger, which releases her grip. In the meantime, Rose breaks the glass of the house and comes in, and she attacks Tim's body with a stick. Meanwhile, Tim is deactivated, but then he activates and kills Rose, and then he blames Abby for his murder, after which he confesses in Abby's voice that he killed Paul and Rose. Then finally he tries to prove that after killing them, he took his own life. So as soon as he was about to throw Abby from above, then he tells her that I love you. Meanwhile, Abby also tells him I love you, which deactivates Tim and saves Abby's life. Then after a while, an alert comes on Abby's smartwatch, which tells her that she is pregnant. And friends, this story ends here with this suspense.